action.
Hi guys, welcome back to our channel, or if you haven't seen our videos before, I'm Max.
I'm Lee.
And this is Oki. We're currently 6 months into our trip going from Canada to Panama, and we've traveled over 25,000 kilometers on the road. Today we're going to talk about how much it actually costs to live the van life while you're traveling.
So Max finds the topic boring, but I'm actually very enthusiastic about it. We've been budgeting everything that we've spent so far on our trip, and we actually use a little app called Travel Pocket. Anyway, point of it is that we have broken down all the things that we've spent our money on since we've left, and we want to share them with you today. So there's a couple little notes that I want to talk about first. We broke down the 6 months for the first 3 points into two categories, between Canada, US as one category, and Mexico as the second. We did this because the prices vary due to being in different countries. And lastly, we converted everything here into US dollars just so that it's relatable across the world.
As the US is the center of the world.
Apparently. At the end of our video, we're going to share with you 5 tips that we wish we knew before we got on the road that would have saved us a little bit of money.
For sure.
So we broke down the categories into our first 3 main expenses, those being food, diesel, and van maintenance. I'll get us started with food. First, food has been our biggest cost on the trip. There's a couple reasons for that. Max and I, as we said before, I'm 5'10" and Max is 6'1", and we both eat a lot of food. We're very active people, and we just love to eat. We have no other way to explain that. We do care about our health. We eat mostly plant-based, and so we'll break down our costs for you. In Canada and the US, per month we spent about $330 per person on food. A note of that is that we mostly grocery shopped and cooked our own food, so that brought us to about $11 a day in the US for 3 months. Comparing that to Mexico, in Mexico we spent about $177 each a month, which is more like $6 a day. The difference with that is that in Mexico we've actually eaten out a lot more because we found after a while it was cheaper to eat out than it was to make the same kind of meals we were making before in the van.
Street food's the best.
Street food's amazing, and churros. Churros everywhere. Okay, that brings us into diesel.
So diesel was our second biggest cost on the road. It makes sense considering it, as I said, we've traveled over 25,000 kilometers. One of the main reasons we chose a Sprinter was because it's really economical. We get about 24 miles per gallon, and that's stayed pretty much the same even after we added about a ton of weight to it during our conversion. This is key because during the trip we like to zigzag around a lot, find the most beautiful places, and sometimes that means backtracking. We don't mind doing that because it doesn't actually cost us that much in diesel, whereas we've met some people on the road that they get about 8 miles per gallon or 12 miles per gallon, maybe because they got a cheaper vehicle to start off with. The problem with this is they don't want to backtrack, they don't want to zigzag, so they miss out on some of those nice spots. That might be fine if they're planning on staying in the one area, but for doing big trips like this, I feel like getting an economical vehicle is key. So in terms of the actual cost of diesel per month, we're looking at around $245 per month for diesel per person. That breaks down into $8.25 a day. Now that was in the US and Canada. When we got to Mexico, our costs per month per person is $121, and our cost per day is $4. It's a lot lower because in Mexico we found a lot more spots where you could camp for free that we really liked, and therefore spent longer times at those camp spots before moving on.
So next we're going to talk about van maintenance. I'll let Max take this one because he's been doing all the van maintenance himself, which has saved us a lot of money in the long run, and that's something that has definitely helped us.
Yeah, so this one is obviously going to be very subjective and depend on just what luck you have when you're driving with your van. For us, we spent in Canada and the US $129 per person per month on van maintenance, around $4.25 a day. This was actually a little bit higher than it should have been, and that is because before we went into Mexico, we stocked up on spare parts for the van. Air filters, oil, brake pads. We got everything like that because we weren't sure going down into Central America whether we would be able to get those parts. In Mexico, for van maintenance, it's worked out to be $34.50 per month per person, and only about $1.15 a day. As Lee mentioned, I have done quite a few of the fixes myself with things that have gone wrong. If we had have taken them to a mechanic, our prices obviously would have been higher.
Yeah. One more thing we want to note about that, we've been getting online onto the Sprinter forum. If you own a Sprinter, this forum has been extremely helpful, and there is a lot of amazing people on there who really just want to help. So if you ever have van troubles and you drive a Sprinter, get online and check out that forum, and that's where we've had a lot of help from too. So next we're going to get into our secondary costs. We grouped these together in the overall 6 months to break them down to how much they cost per person in 6 months. So first, I'll start us off with laundry. Laundry we only do about every couple of weeks. In the States and Canada, we were doing self-coin laundry, whereas in Mexico, for the same price, you can drop it off at a laundromat and pick it up the next day. In the end, we've spent about $13, give or take, on laundry for 6 months each.
We don't do a lot of laundry.
We don't do a lot of laundry. So propane.
In terms of propane, this one was surprising for us. I thought we were actually going to spend a lot more, considering we cook around 2 meals a day using a propane burner. Also in Canada, we had a propane heater that stopped us freezing to death, essentially, because we were there in the winter.
Yeah, that was key.
Propane has worked out to be $18.75 per person for 6 months. Generally, we have to fill up our tank about once a month. As I mentioned in our other video, it's only a little 5-pounder, but it lasts us really well. It's only about $4 to fill.
So that brings us next into camping fees. This is an area where we saved a lot of money because we've been doing stealth camping. One of the reasons that we outfitted our van and kept it very neutral on the outside is so that we can get away with pulling off on the side of the road or camping at rest stations or camping in neighborhoods. When we were in Canada, the US, it's slightly less social when you're not paying for campgrounds. However, as a lot of people know, campgrounds can get up to $20 to $30 a night, and that is just would not be affordable for year-long travel. So brings us to, in 6 months, we've each spent $40 on camping fees.
Not too bad.
Yeah, and just to mention, this place is free. Okay, so that brings us into booze.
So for alcohol, we spent per person, we spent $113
In 6 months.
in 6 months. That's pretty low. I feel like this is once again something super subjective. We're not very big drinkers. We don't really drink unless we're with friends. And so yeah, it didn't end up being that high, but once again, it'll just depend on the kind of person you are.
Yeah. So next that brings us to Aki. Now, something to note, traveling with a dog is not much more expensive than having your dog at home anyway. Majority of his cost has been food. The only additional cost that we've had is getting his pre-health check before coming into Mexico, and we just got him on some heartworm tablets. So in total, in 6 months, we have each spent $150 on Aki's food, toys, and vet checks.
Worth every penny.
Yeah. So very good.
So next we have our ferry fees. This one, once again, it depends where you're traveling. We ended up going on 5 ferries so far this trip, so the costs have added up. For 6 months per person, we're looking at $241, but that includes going to the Manitoulin Islands in Canada, going to Vancouver Island and return, going on a ferry in San Francisco, and also going across the ferry from Baja.
16-hour ferry ride.
A 16-hour ferry ride from Baja to mainland Mexico.
Yeah.
So yeah, once again, depending on where you are, it may not be a factor.
Yeah. So that brings us to activity and entertainment. Max and I decided at the beginning of our trip that we would splurge on things that we thought was life-enhancing experiences. One of them being Havasupai Canyon in Arizona. That alone cost us about $200 each to camp and hike for 3 days. But it was absolutely amazing,
stunning.
And it was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. So in total, in 6 months on activities and entertainment, we have both each spent $284. Yeah.
And finally is our miscellaneous category. This one, it's going to sound like it's a lot. It's $674 per person for the 6 months. But this is kind of, well, it's the miscellaneous. It's the stuff that you just don't really think about that adds up. For example, just additions we made to the van as we were going to make it, better for a living space. Things we forgot to bring. Lee bought a new dress. We got a lagoon table leg that we showed in another video for our table.
Our little heater in Canada was an addition.
Yeah, so those things all just add up. And so just keep in mind that when you hit the road, there's going to be things you've forgotten and there's going to be things you're going to have to pay for as you go.
Yeah. Awesome. So the last category that we haven't put into numbers exactly is because it's going to vary depending on where you live and where you're going to be traveling. that brings us to phone payments, travel insurance, and van insurance. Now, for us, just to include it in our budget, we've both spent $883 each in 6 months between those 3 variables. However, it will be either cheaper or more expensive for you depending on where you're traveling. As we said, we came from Ontario where insurance is very expensive. Having a modified vehicle, we'll get into that later. So to bring us to a total number here, in this number, including the additional costs of phone plan, van insurance, and travel insurance, which will vary for you a lot, we've each spent $5,659 in 6 months on the road.
We think that's pretty good. We've actually budgeted for about $12,000 for the entire year per person. And considering we're now heading down into Central America where, you know, it's most likely to be cheaper than what Canada and the US were, we're definitely on track, and we're now looking at going for longer than a year.
Yeah, okay. So now we're gonna get into the 5 tips that are helpful if you're gonna be traveling within North America. So we'll get started here. There are apps out there, for example, WikiCamps or iOverlander, that actually help you find free camp spots, more remote camping. They can tell you where you can find propane and fuel. They're all just user-based apps, but they're extremely helpful, and we wish we knew about it earlier.
They've been our Bible.
Yeah.
Tip number 2, the National Parks Pass in the USA. If you're traveling through the USA, it's definitely worth buying one. It's $80. However, if you don't buy one and you just go to one national park, sometimes it can be $30 on its own. But our big tip for this National Parks Pass is either buy one secondhand. A lot of people, apart for 2 signatures, a lot of people only do 1 signature on the card. So you can buy them secondhand on Craigslist or Kijiji, put on your second signature and you're good to go, and you can get it for less than half the price. If you do buy it new, just put the 1 signature on it, and then you can always sell it at the end and make some money back.
Yeah. So number 3, we suggest to either use a cheap fuel finder app or just be mindful of where you're going to be driving next, depending on what province or state you're going to be entering. We noticed how much the fuel prices varied from province to province and state to state, and sometimes it could save you a fair amount of money if you were just thinking ahead of where you're going to gas up next.
And number 4, this one was one that really took us by surprise. I think a lot of people have in their heads, when you get to Mexico, everything's going to be cheaper. Although that's true for a lot of things, one thing it's not true for is like pre-packaged dry foods. We found that when we got into Mexico, a lot of those products that you're used to buying at the supermarket were more expensive, the dry foods, because they came from the US. So one big tip I'd give you there is any of those dry foods, stock up in the US, go to like a bargain store there, that's what we went to a lot, and then stock up and bring it over with you into Mexico, because you might either struggle to find them or they're going to be more expensive.
Yeah. And our last tip to share with you, which is the most important that we cannot stress enough, is really be diligent and look into your insurance before you modify your own vehicle. Since we built our van in Ontario, we had a very difficult time getting our van insured because we did all the work ourselves.
Yeah. They also didn't like that I was Australian, which made it a lot harder.
Yeah, so anyway, we've had multiple issues. The point of it is just, be diligent, do your research beforehand. It varies from state to state and province to province. We've met people on the road who have very cheap insurance or claim some of their inside as house insurance. There's a lot of ways of doing it. Just make sure you know how to insure your vehicle before you start your build and save a lot of stress on yourself.
And if you are an Ontarian that is trying to get through with insurance, feel free to message us
and
we'll
be
a shoulder to cry
it because we know everything about it.
We'll be a shoulder to cry on for sure.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So, guys, we think that's a wrap for this video. Thank you for taking the time to watch it, and we hope some of the information that we put out there can be useful to you and your future travels.
We hope it gave you a good insight into the cost of van life. If you want to see more content from us, we're going to start putting up a video every week, Wednesday at midday. So make sure you click the subscribe button. We also have an Instagram page, so check that out for what goes on day to day in between the video shoots. And we'll see you next time.
See ya.
Bye. Wow,
we did so much better.